Hello and welcome to CBC Saskatchewan's coverage of the 2025 Saskatchewan budget, live for the Rotunda at the Saskatchewan Legislature. I'm Adam Hunter. Alongside me, my colleague Alexander Quon. We'll be bringing you a live coverage all afternoon for as long as it takes, Alex, to get all of the analysis from the stakeholders, ministers, from the opposition. We're expecting to hear from mayors, many different people, so stay with us as we'll bring you all the reaction to the budget, which just dropped seconds ago. Finance Minister Jim Ryder standing up in the legislature to a packed house in there. It's one of the biggest crowds I've seen, Alex, in the Rotunda. And Jim Ryder gonna break the news to everyone that the Saskatchewan government is projecting what, Alex?
A slim surplus of $12 million. It's going to be a very interesting budget, I think, from their perspective. It's also going to be an interesting budget from the opposition's perspective. They had a lot to say when we spoke with them earlier. I think one of the big takeaways for me is the lack of a tariff plan. There is no contingencies laid out in this budget to deal with the threat of tariffs from the United States and from China. I think that will be a big point of contention for not just the opposition, but a lot of people as well.
We're going to show you the numbers as they break down. 21 billion in revenue, 21 billion in expenses, but as Alex mentioned, that small shoestring surplus projected of $12 million. The government had projected an $18 million surplus this time last year for this year. We'll take a look at the projected financial overview now. From last year, there was a deficit forecast. We look ahead, there's that 12.2 surplus. And we look ahead to the future and a very, rosy outlook, let's say, with a smaller surplus again next year and then into the 140 million mark for 27-28. And we know that what's projected on budget day, and we'll say this over and over again, is never where it ends up at the end of the year. There's many different factors that can play into this. Alex, you talked about the lack of a contingency built into this budget. So there is some documentation. There are things in there where they've worked out different scenarios, but they haven't put in, sort of a rainy day or like we're going to set aside a few $1 billion like some other provinces have done.
Yeah, absolutely. Alberta, BC, New Brunswick, they've all put money aside, running a deficit for their budget, put that money aside just to make sure they have something planned for when these tariffs take effect and as this kind of tariff front goes on. So Saskatchewan hasn't done that. I think that's the major takeaway from this, is that we spoke with Finance Minister Jim Ryder earlier. He said this allows them some flexibility. They present this as a slim kind of position where they can be flexible, respond as the tariffs play out. And really, they say the tariffs were so chaotic, and they're still chaotic, going, kicking in from one day to the next, being delayed a week, delayed a few months. Like it's such a chaotic situation, according to Ryder, that there was no point in putting any of the tariff planning. It's a really big departure, though, from other provinces, and I think that is going to be a point of contention.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we'll get into this as well. The NDP holding a press conference on an embargoed basis before this, saying that this is a work of fiction, that the budget isn't worth the paper it's printed on. That's what Trent Wotherspoon said, the finance critic. So they're pointing to that and really hammering home that the tariff should have been factored in. When you think about the budget planning, the government's saying that we're delivering. That's their big word this year, delivering on their promises from last fall's election campaign. I think from what I can see, almost every election promise that's in there is included in the budget. There are a few small tweaks. So there's things like putting the PSD on vaping. There's also an increase to SED and CIS, a small increase. I think it's like $11 million. So a few things that weren't in the election campaign that are in this budget, but for the most part, it's what we saw in the fall as far as the promises go. And we look at the top 5 spending areas. How about you take us through this, Alex?
Absolutely. So it's health is $8 billion in spending, education is $4.4 billion, social services is $1.8 billion, agriculture, obviously an important part of Saskatchewan's economy, $1.6 billion, and then protection of persons and property, essentially a catch-all for justice and crime and policing, that is $1.1 billion in spending.
And so we look at those numbers, and this is how the revenue breaks down, and we're over now $10 billion in taxation for this year. Non-renewable resources, $2 billion. We have net income from government business enterprises, $700 million. Own source revenue, I think $3 billion, and then we have the transfers from federal government as well. So over total revenue overall is $21 billion.
And the debt, I think, is also something that we should talk about. The province is bringing on $2.5 billion of debt. They say that's mostly for capital projects and big projects that they need to spend some money on. But it's not something that they also say that they're that concerned about. So looking into the future, they do say they are going to pay down that debt as projected in the budget. So 2026, we're going to be carrying $38.3 billion, and that's up from the past few years. 2023, $32.6 billion. Then 2024, $30.8 billion, 2025, $34.8 billion, and then finally this year, as they add $2.5 billion to the debt, it's $38.3 billion.
So Alex and I are going to bring the reaction to you throughout the afternoon here from the rotunda at the legislature, as it's going to get really loud and really busy. People still behind the doors here inside and downstairs and other overflow rooms watching the budget. They're listening to it. We know what's in the budget, and that's why we can tell you, as the budget embargo is now lifted with the minister standing up. So Alex, I'll let you go. Get reaction from here in the rotunda. We'll bring you some interviews with some of the stakeholders here as we go this afternoon on CBC Saskatchewan's Budget 2025 coverage. We're going to start with Alex is getting ready to talk to Randy Golding from SUMA, the SUMA president. And once Alex and Randy are in position there, I'll turn it over to him. Alex, take it away.
Executive of SUMA. So I guess this budget, what do you see it delivers to people in this province in the urban centers?
So SUMA represents 440 urban members across this province. So we represent over 80% of the population live in urban municipalities. And what we've been hearing is some of the things that we're seeing in the provincial budget, and the increase that we've seen now in the municipal revenue sharing is very welcome, and we acknowledge that we're very pleased with that, because that's a $21 million increase, and it's essential that our municipalities have that sort of funding because of the economic uncertainty that's happening in our world right now and in our municipalities, to continue providing the services and the programs that our residents of our communities and the province expect. The revenue sharing is absolutely essential.
That boost to revenue sharing, is it enough for every municipality, every urban center in this province? Obviously, there's a large amount of capital projects probably coming up that they want to see funding. Is it enough?
Yeah, we heard some commitment from provincial government in this budget to continue funding infrastructure, but that of course depends on what is coming out of the federal government, and there's some uncertainty there. So, those are things that we will continue working as a partner with provincial government. We do have, a couple of things that we saw that might be concerning, and we will continue to work with our provincial government. And that's around some things that did not see increases. So Saskatchewan Assessment Management Agency, for instance, did not receive an increase. We saw the transit for people with disabilities did not receive. We saw the airports funding that comes from provincial government did not receive additional funding. So when that happens, when you don't see those increases, that of course with inflation means that someone has to pick up the change in that, and that's our municipalities. So we do have concerns with that, because all of the things that I just listed will be increasing in cost, and we know that the municipalities will have to come up with those increases.
You also mentioned some uncertainty. Obviously, tariffs is one of the big factors. A potential federal election coming up is another big factor. What have you heard from your members on what they would have liked to see, or anything else that they would have wanted to see in this budget?
Well, I think that's definitely to come because we know that we need infrastructure. The infrastructure deficit is only continuing to grow. Our municipalities cannot come out of a budget or go into the budget with a deficit, which is unlike other orders of government because we're seeing that. We can't do that. So in order to continue with maintaining our infrastructure and then replacing, we need funding. So we are very much looking forward to what our provincial government will do with us as partners, because we have to contribute to maintain that infrastructure that so much is needed in our province.
Another big thing out of this budget is there's no planning, I guess, for tariff contingencies. What are your thoughts on that, not having it built into this budget?
Yeah. Well, what we are looking at is total uncertainty, and that always brings unease. We're always uneasy about that because we're setting our budgets now and we don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months' time. So we need to have some type of certainty, and we would certainly hope that our province will be a partner in that. But we are also concerned with where we might be going with people that are living in our communities that aren't housed, and where we are going with mental health and addictions, because we're seeing that as a concern. And it's a concern for all of us, because those are citizens of our municipalities, but they're citizens of our province. So we want to continue to work with our provincial government to make sure that no one's left behind.
Another thing that the government has touted in this budget is a plan to get more, people out of the emergency rooms into urgent care centers. More urgent care centers planned for Moose Jaw, Prince Albert, North Battleford, and then more for Saskatoon and Regina. Do you think that those are still a little bit away, but what do you think your members will react to that news that more are planned for their communities?
Yeah. Well, our members are right across this province, east to west, north to south, and they come from communities large and small. And so some will have distances to travel to urgent care facilities, so we need to make sure that when they get there, there is care that they can get. But we also need to make sure that they don't forget anyone, and we can't be waiting. Sometimes those urgent care, we need to get immediate service. So we will be absolutely talking with our government to make sure that that happens.
Well, Randy, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Adam, I'll throw it back to you. That was Randy Golden with SUMA.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with Gage Holbrick from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as we take a look at the revenue and expenses for this year. The surplus of $12 million, a small surplus projected by the finance minister and the Saskatchewan government. And Gage, when you see that number, and I know you've been talking about the debts leading up to this budget, concerns about the debt, is that the number one thing that stands out to you about this year's budget?
That is the number one thing, right? That $12 million isn't the most important number. The most important number for taxpayers in this budget is the $2.4 billion more that's being added to the debt by the government in this budget. It's going to cost more to taxpayers, right, when we see all those interest payments that's going to be on that debt. So this surplus number is not going to decrease the debt. It's simply hiding behind the real number, which is that $2.4 billion increase in the debt over last year.
A couple of years ago, the government decided to spend some money on the debt, pay that down. Now we showed the numbers a bit earlier, the projections going up, increasing, projected increase over year, up until, like, would you combine the debt, about $38 billion. What do you make of that?
It's irresponsible borrowing, right? We're going to a time of really hard economic uncertainty and headwinds. A lot of things could happen in the next year, and the government decided, instead of saving some money to prepare for that problem, they decided to borrow irresponsibly billions more dollars and put that onto the backs of taxpayers, right? And we're looking at almost $1 billion in interest payments on that debt this year, $705 per Saskatchewanian. Saskatchewanians are cutting back, saving things for things that could be in the future. The government is continuing just to spend and put that onto the backs of taxpayers.
When it comes to how this government projects and makes money, and the revenue that's brought in, the majority of that now is through taxation and the PST, expansion of the PST, a growing population. What does that tell you about how the government is able to, let's say, balance the budget, if they are able to balance the budget this year?
Well, it's going to be extremely difficult for them, right? Because if the tariffs hit Saskatchewan hard, the budget says they could lose about $1.4 billion in revenue. That wipes out that surplus and adds millions of dollars more in loans that taxpayers are ultimately going to have to pay for. A more responsible budget would have seen the government get the debt start going down, not adding billions of dollars to it, with potential for billions of more to be added if this tariff situation gets worse.
What should the government have done in your mind?
The government should have cut spending, but unfortunately in this government, in this budget, they didn't find anywhere to cut spending. Out of 11 out of 12 of the main areas the government spends money on, they're increasing the amount of spending in this budget. They were already spending at all-time highs before that, but with all the potential economic uncertainty, it should be time to cut spending to save taxpayers money on that debt and debt interest payments.
We saw other provinces like Alberta and BC built in some contingencies, set some money aside, run deficits, New Brunswick as well, because of the tariffs and the tariff uncertainty. Do you think the government should have put something in there? I know there's scenarios, but they don't have anything specific about we need to put this money aside in case the tariffs hit us really hard.
The government should be always as honest as it can with taxpayers. If you walk up today and say, oh, we've got this $12 million, but if that can disappear tomorrow, that's not real, and taxpayers should be looking at what the actual most likely scenario is. There's a problem with this government where every time they stand up and they put up a budget, they say it's not going to be this bad. We get to the mid-year, it gets much worse. The government would be much better served to taxpayers to be upfront about what they're making them pay every year and how much they're adding to the debt.
When we see special warrant spending, and there's just before, a month before the budget, we see hundreds of millions of dollars be spent in special warrants. Do you have an issue with that at all?
Well, yeah, the first one is the government is spending money it doesn't have. And we're seeing that in this budget by how many billions of dollars they're adding to the debt, as well as taxpayers aren't fully informed about what that money's doing, right? Everybody's looking at the budget every year to find out what the government is spending, and just like a household, that's what you expect they're going to spend. And by adding hundreds of millions of dollars to that midway through the year, it's dishonest budgeting, and it's not being fair to taxpayers.
Gage, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That's Gage Holbrick, the Prairie Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Alex, I'm saying it to you.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'm here with Brianna Solberg with the CFIB. Brianna, what do you think this budget offers to small businesses?
Well, as you can imagine, small businesses are facing a lot of unpredictability and uncertainty right now. And so we had been calling for this budget to provide some stability. And I think in a sense we got that, there's no surprises here. But I don't know that it goes far enough to provide any sort of relief considering the impacts that tariffs have had already and will continue to have for small businesses.
What do you make of the lack of contingency planning in this budget? There is nothing, no money set aside like other provinces have, like Alberta and BC. Is that concerning for you when your members are kind of looking for answers on what will happen next?
Mm-hmm. It's certainly concerning, and I think that it almost devalues what we're seeing today. You have to take it with a grain of salt. We know for a fact our members are telling us that they face greater uncertainty now than they did even at the height of the pandemic, and that's something not to be taken lightly. We see the small business tax rate frozen at 1%. That's good news, but we know in the pandemic, back in 2020, it was reduced to 0. We may need to see that again, and there's no contingency planning for that in this document, so more may be needed.
What are you hearing from your members about their concerns around tariffs? Is there any kind of specific concern you're hearing from people?
Yeah, you can imagine. We've heard it all. They have faced canceled contracts, delayed inventory, delayed shipments of their inventory, and they risk losing their consumer base in the United States. And not to mention the retaliatory tariffs that Canada has imposed also will mean significant cost increases for our members. And today we're supposed to see 100% increase on tariffs from China on canola. We know that that's very concerning with farmers looking to put seed in the ground in the coming weeks. Everybody's just kind of on pause. What do we do next? We get questions from members all the time. What do we do next? And they're looking to government for guidance, but no one really knows.
What would you have liked to see the province offer in terms of kind of support for businesses? What would you like to see from them potentially in the future as these tariffs kind of kick in?
So one thing we've been calling for, as Saskatchewan is one of the only provinces to charge a sales tax on capital investments and machinery and equipment, we've been calling for the government to look at ways to eliminate that for small businesses in particular, to help encourage investment and purchases of machinery and equipment at a time when investment decisions are hindered because of tariffs.
Another new thing that the province put out in this budget is they are now going to start charging PST on vaping products, essentially treating vaping products like tobacco. Any thoughts on that? They are going to start charging PST, I think, as of June 1st is what I remember from the budget document.
Yes, I did see that in there. We don't have data from our members on this, obviously, but so I can't say it's something small business owners would either support or oppose, but I can't say I'm surprised.
In terms of spending in this budget, is there, I guess, anything that you would have liked to see more of, or maybe a reel back in spending? What would your members wanted to see?
I think it's right for the government to be fiscally conservative, given the situation. The infrastructure spending that we're going to be seeing, we know for a fact that our members do see an infrastructure deficit as a significant setback for their businesses. If they want to grow and expand, the province has to be willing to meet them where they're at, so that's something they appreciate.
Okay. Any other final thoughts maybe on this budget and what you would have preferred to see?
Yeah, just going forward, I think it goes without saying that small business owners are the backbone of our economy. They need all of our support now more than ever. And like I said, the Shop Local campaigning got them through the pandemic. It will hopefully get them through this time, but it remains to be seen what more is going to be needed from the government going forward.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brianna.
Yes, thank you.
That was Brianna Solberg with the CFIB. Adam, I'll throw it back to you. Obviously, this budget, still a lot to come, but back to you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Some major points here to recap if people are just joining us. Government projecting a $12 million surplus for 2025-26. This is not far off what they'd expected, projected last year of $18 million. Those are the numbers right now from the government. Slim margin here, and they'll admit that, but they're hoping that the tariffs aren't a major impact on the overall numbers. We look at the overview over the next few years. $74 million next year, and followed by $143.9 million surplus in the following year. So 3 years going into an election, the next election, the government's projecting surpluses. It's going to take a look at the debt, as Gage Holbrick from the Taxpayers Federation talked about. That's increasing about $2 billion this year. Taxpayers Federation saying they're concerned about those numbers, and the government should have dealt with that, as they're worried that the tariff impact is going to take an extra chunk out of that number. We look at the spending areas. Of course, health is number one, education two, social services, agriculture, and protection of persons and property. Interesting note on that one is that we have that's kind of justice, policing, all those things put in, but also the Marshal Service is included in that. And the government is also going ahead a year on when they projected the Marshal Service to be operational. Instead of 2026, it's going to be 2025 this year. And finally, we look at those revenue sources. Taxation, $10 billion. We have non-renewable resources, $2 billion. Net income from government, business enterprises, $700 million, other own source revenue, and transfers from the federal government, both there with the commodities. We'll take a look at those. WTI oil price projected at 71 US a barrel. Oil production, 166.9 million barrels. Potash was going to be down. Same with potash sales from last year. They're projecting the dollar to be around 70 cents US. That would be down. Now, a note about the dollar is every cent that the dollar goes down, that helps the government's revenue, because they can sell commodities and products at kind of a higher rate. People will start buying things because they're cheaper. So that can actually help the government's revenue projection when we see the numbers there as far as the dollar goes. So that's something to keep in mind when you talk about the dollar projection. We're awaiting more people to come out and join us here. The finance minister still speaking in there. This is, of course, also the first day of the legislative sitting. So something that's a little bit unusual this year is the government did not start the legislative sitting for the spring in early March, as is the normal custom. So we usually get a couple weeks of question period and things happening. That did not happen this year. They're starting the first day of question period is the budget day. So we had question period this morning with the opposition leader Carl Lebec, starting off with questions about Donald Trump and asking the premier to talk about that. So we had that. We're going to throw it over here to Alex Quon, who's got a guest waiting. Alex.
Hi there, Adam. Yes, I'm with Sean Davidson, president of the Saskatchewan School Board Association. Sean, tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are on this budget.
Well, our initial response is that this budget does recognize the key cost drivers that our association has talked about a lot. So the key things around the cost of provincial collective agreement are recognized, enrollment growth is recognized, and many of the other inflationary costs that we've spoke about, like other collective agreements with other labor groups that school divisions have contracts with. Cost of busing is something that we've seen elevate substantially the last few years. So we do see recognition of those cost drivers within this budget, and we're pleased about that. Is there room for additional support so that every student can have all the resources they need to succeed regardless of their circumstance or where they live? We're probably not there yet, but at least we're seeing a step in the right direction. We've seen that for the last two budgets now, that education has been prioritized, and that there's at least a recognition that yes, we have substantial cost drivers here, and we're seeing the government recognize that at least. So that's positive. We also see some investment in some additional programming that we've advocated for. So we see investment in the early years. There'll be a ministry program around K-3 literacy. K-3 literacy is something that's obviously vital to a student's entire education career. We know that the students that read and write at grade level in grade 3 are likely to have more successful outcomes throughout their journey in our system. So that's something we've talked about a lot, is that early years development, pre-K, kindergarten, and those early years literacy. So we see the government recognize that to some degree. We also see an expansion of the mental health capacity building program, which has been a very successful program in the schools that offer it. And obviously not every school in the province is able to do that on $3 million, which has traditionally been, but we see an additional $1.6 million there, which will allow for more programs. So, and again, mental health is a key pillar within mental health and wellness, a key pillar in the provincial education plan. So that's a positive investment as well. On the capital side, we also see some positive things. We're seeing some new schools announced in today's budget. As I say in the press release, there's always more fence than paint, so would we love to see more infrastructure programs? Absolutely. But recognizing that the government has invested in some new schools in communities where the population is growing rapidly and they're needed, that's good to see. We see some renovations in some smaller communities, that's welcome, and we also see an increase to the preventative maintenance and renewal budget, as it's called, which is what funds school divisions to maintain their existing facilities. And we've long advocated that fund needs to be about 1% of asset value every year. We're not there yet, but at least we're moving in a positive direction again after several years of that preventative maintenance fund really being frozen. So.
You mentioned, there could always be more being done. I guess, what in particular would you want to see, have seen more of in this budget in terms of things that your members would have liked?
Well, we've covered the key cost elements here, but we haven't covered that additional investment that would allow for school divisions to provide additional services and additional programming for students. So once our key cost drivers are addressed, then additional dollars can be utilized by school divisions to improve services. And I think that this budget is going to fall short of an ability to improve the services we have, that on initial glance. And of course, that will shake out differently for all of our 27 members depending on once the final funding envelope is released. One of the other things that we learned is that school divisions won't be receiving their entire revenue for next year today, like they normally do on budget day. And the reason for that is because there's still unanswered questions within the provincial collective agreement. And so the arbitrator's report made it very clear on the salary award, and that was exactly what the government offered, so very anticipated. The additional award within the arbitration award, actually, the parties are to go back to the table and finalize the final language around those clauses. And that work is starting, and we're very pleased about that. We're hopeful that the committees can reach an agreement on that in a very rapid and timely fashion so that we can get some final clarity around the agreement and then implement the agreement as is finally agreed to. So there's 60 days to do that. We're hoping that it'll happen much quicker than that, because then that will allow the funding to be distributed to divisions and they can do their work on their budgets. So.
Okay, Sean, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
That was Sean Davidson with the Saskatchewan School Board Association. Adam, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with Jim Farney, the director of the Johnson Suriyama Graduate School of Public Policy. And Jim, you were able to take in some of the budget day festivities, hear from the finance minister. What's your big takeaway?
Yeah, they are festivities for me. I mean, this is a really constrained budget, right? It's constrained in the kind of tax cut side. They're there. It's constrained in the new spending side. It's constrained even in the amount that it says it will do about Trump. It basically says, big scary thing out there, can't put a number to it, so we'll just proceed as kind of standard practice.
Did that surprise you at all? Other provinces have done sort of the opposite, Alberta, BC, New Brunswick.
Yeah, I was guessing there would be some sort of contingency plan. I think the expectation of the government is we have a very strong credit rating. We have a pretty diversified export market, and so if we do have to go to market to borrow partway through the year, we will be able to, and there are simply too many things you can't put a number on. Like in that part of the budget, yes, Trump tariffs would be massively disruptive if they lasted the whole year, but we can't tell you tomorrow, is it going to be 6 hours, 6 months, 6 weeks, at what rate? So better to just proceed as planned with an awareness that there is this uncertainty in our budgeting. It reminds me a little bit of the COVID pause 5 years ago, where there was shut the world down at budget day, wait 6 weeks to see what happens, and then proceed with a best guess that you're going to have to update mid-year.
Does that make things really uncertain? Like we don't know, we don't know day to day, and especially in Saskatchewan when it comes to things like the crops, the weather, that can affect the overall budget at the end of the year. And the number from today changes drastically year over year. But specifically this year, it seems like many things are up in the air, including the tariff on canola from China.
So there's all of that outside stuff. We also saw a heavier use last year of special warrants to adjust for collective agreements. So that was a big shift in last year's budget. We know that wildfires and things like crop insurance, because of a more variable climate, are bigger things. One thing you've seen other jurisdictions move to is kind of a more robust kind of fall economic update and adjustment. There's no discussion of that here, but it is the type of world we're in, and it's a $21 billion operation, and so even 5% shifts start to add up to real money.
When it comes to the government, I think, from my view, they made some election promises, and they stuck to those. And there are many of them, almost all of them are in the budget, including things like spending, and we saw the debt projection increase as well. That's always a concern over what you're borrowing, how much that, and I guess to you, how much of an issue is that?
I think the debt, and this is how it's portrayed in the budget, so long as it stays at a reasonably consistent part of GDP, all the new borrowing is for capital investment in the crowns. So that's a reasonable way to spread the cost of upgrading electrical lines or upgrading the gas system. That's just how it ought to be done. Where the kind of broader or longer term story I think is really worth paying attention to is if you look at our population and GDP numbers in the budget, we're not growing per capita GDP, and we haven't for some time. So yes, we've got population growth, yes, we've got GDP growth, but the economy per person's not growing, and that's part of the constraint the government's dealing with and would be dealing with without Trump.
When it comes to a federal election on the horizon here, it could be called any day now. What are you watching for as far as it relates to the province?
I think regardless of who wins the federal election, I think one of the reasons to maybe not go heavy into contingency is the federal government's got much deeper pockets than any province does. It's reasonable to expect that if we hit really bad tariffs, the first out of the gate will be a kind of federal rescue plan for affected workers and producers, and the provinces will then fill in around the edges. So I think that's one piece. I think the broader strategy, we saw the back and forth between the leader of the opposition and the premier on the floor today. Is our strategy a very robust, essentially Donald Trump is the enemy, Canadian nationalism boycott sort of story? Or is it a more soft power, engage with our partners in business and civil society in the States, try to find ways to work around tariffs? That will be decided, I think, based on who becomes Prime Minister.
When it comes to Saskatchewan's economy too, we're pretty diversified compared to other provinces with our trading partners. We're not solely reliable on the U.S. There is some some words in the budget document that talk about, well, this could if this happens, this is kind of a worst case scenario, let's say. When we're mapping it out, and this is so uncertain,
Right.
but is Saskatchewan placed a little bit better than some other provinces because we do trade with India, China, the EU, and other countries?
Yes, up until the Chinese canola tariffs, right, which probably will hit us as hard or harder than any likely American tariff. You know, that undercuts that story. We've seen how vulnerable we are to changes in India. So when you take those big three out, or you put those big three at risk, yes, we're more diversified, but those are three markets that are kind of core to us being hurt. So maybe a little bit less vulnerable to the US, but this kind of global retreat to nationalism we're seeing worldwide, we are vulnerable to that.
And last one for me, when it comes to local issues, one thing we've seen and heard a lot over the last number of days and weeks is overdose crisis in the cities. There's concerns about healthcare, what we're doing with emergency rooms that are busy, backfilling and sending patients to Calgary for cancer treatment, women there. When it comes to the budget spending, did you see anything in there that addresses that directly?
There is a significant boost to mental health, which covers some of that, but I think the core difficulty, again, this story of constraint, overall spending is just keeping up with population growth and inflation. In areas where needs are getting more complex, whether it's more complex elementary school classrooms, whether it's the more complex addiction stories that bleed into housing and disability that we're seeing, it's hard to see where there's a big pot of resources being flowed in that will help meet those more complex needs.
Jim, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Adam.
That's Jim Farney, the director of the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, breaking down the budget for us. Jim mentioned that today was the first question period, and what we saw from question period was some pointed questions by the leader of the opposition, where we're seeing Alex start with very direct questions about the Premier's response to the U.S. and Donald Trump. And so for people that weren't watching, we were watching from the gallery, what did you take away from, I guess, what did the Premier say, what did the opposition leaders say about pointed questions about Donald Trump?
Yeah, Carla Beck was really calling for the Premier to kind of condemn the talk around the 51st state, clearly state that he is not, is opposed to that. Mo spoke back against it. I think is probably he didn't maybe come out as forcefully as Carla Beck wanted him to, but he did say he's opposed to tariffs. He's opposed to the 51st state conversation. I think this is kind of also laying the groundwork for a motion that we're expecting to hear from the NDP. We've been told they are expected to move a motion to kind of condemn the talk by Donald Trump, condemn his administration. So I think that was a lot of the laying the groundwork for that. It obviously isn't being introduced today because the budget's going to be the main focus, but they did say they are planning to introduce that tomorrow.
And when it comes to what we heard from the NDP today, you were in their embargoed news conference. Trent Wotherspoon spoke. The opposition leader Carla Beck spoke. What were your main takeaways from that?
That they really don't believe in the numbers that the province is putting forward in this budget. We heard terms like not worth the paper it's printed on. It's called it a piece of fiction. I think they took a very critical eye at that kind of slim surplus. They didn't like that there was no plan around the tariffs, no contingencies, anything like that. They are, in the past few weeks, they really have focused on tariffs and kind of the Saskatchewan response, wanting the province to do more. I don't think that they heard that in this budget.
And when it comes to some things that the government has announced, we saw Minister Jeremy Harrison at Evraz Steel announcing a deal to procure products from Evraz to try and boost things, maybe insulate against some of the threats from the U.S. and other countries. So the government is, being proactive in those ways. That's some of their perspective. And when it comes to, we heard from Premier Mo today as well. What did he have to say?
Well, he really defended the budget put forward. He really wanted to stress that this was a budget that fulfilled their promises made during the election. He kind of did put forward an idea that this is allows the province to be more flexible by not building in, these large sums of money as contingency fees. You're really allowing us to react depending whatever comes. He made a big point of emphasizing that these tariffs have been inconsistent. They can be on one day, off the next, or even on and off within the same day, right? So he really stressed that because we don't know how these are going to play out, we don't know how long they're going to last. He really stressed that this is the best way forward. He also touted that he might be one of the few provinces to table a budget that is balanced. He kind of took a few shots at Alberta, BC, New Brunswick, all of which have tabled deficit budgets, but specifically deficit budgets with the idea of addressing those contingencies around the tariffs. So he really kind of defended that budget put forward by
Alex, thanks for your analysis. We're going to be running around here with me, grabbing reaction from people, and so I'll let you go, and we're going to bring in another guest here in just a few seconds. Murray Mandrick is my partner on the political panel on CBC on Fridays, and Murray is the columnist for the Star Phoenix and the Leader Post here. Murray, you've seen a few budgets? A few.
41.
Is that right?
Yes.
Where does this rank? I want a precise ranking.
It's hard to rank it, but it is a very strange one in the sense, I don't think I've ever seen one where they're so dismissive or oblivious to whether it's a deficit or a surplus. They're pretending it's a surplus, but you look at the numbers. There's no way it's going to hold at this time, by this time next year, or for that matter, in 3 months, in 6 months, because a $12 million margin of error on a $21 billion budget is just nothing. And there's too many variables, too many things that can go wrong. I think it would have been smarter, better, had they just basically said, look, we have a deficit budget. We don't know what to do with the trade war, and we're going to do as much as we possibly can to deal with that. They kind of did say that, but yet they kind of didn't. Like, strategically, I don't know where this kind of gets them in terms of having to say that they put a deficit, because then when it goes back, bounces back, or a surplus, because when it bounces back to a deficit, they have to do some explaining, and that's never a good thing when you're government and explaining.
I get a sense that when we see the promises that were made in the election campaign, they all are included in this budget for the most part, and whether it's future spending or income tax or healthcare, education, what have you. But the budget says, it was printed on March 10th. That's in the budget document, and
February
it seems
18th too is when they put it to bed, which is silly.
So. Is there any grace for the government when it comes to not knowing what's happening and these things? Some of their explanation is, well, from day to day, hour to hour, we don't know what Donald Trump's going to do.
In fairness to them, they probably would have been criticized for an April budget. That said, it should have been an April budget where at least they would have known where Donald Trump is a little better in terms of the April tariffs and whether they're going through. And secondly, put more intelligent thought into whether or not there should be a contingency fund. One thing I don't buy is the explanation that somehow if we put together a contingency fund, it would have just added more debt to our already rising debt. Well, here's your problem. Your debt is already going to rise by $3.5 billion with a B this year. You're over $1 billion in financial charges, and financial charges are in essence the credit card bill, the interest on the credit card bill that you pay. This is the accumulation from past deficits. So this is obviously not your priority as government. This is not your thing. So just be honest with the people and say this is a deficit budget. Frankly, you planned 3 years of deficit budgets when you ran in the October campaign, because that's what their campaign literature said. So now we're looking at a situation where they have to now explain, probably, quite likely, in 3 to 6 months from now, why they're off course, because tariffs are going to happen. And even if they don't happen, look what's happening with the stock market, look what's happening with oil prices. That they're, I think, projecting to be $71 US a barrel. I looked yesterday, they were 66. It's a big deal because you lose a lot of money. Now, once again, you have the financial officials saying, well, a low dollar helps us with oil and everything else. It doesn't help you and me as a consumer when you're buying stuff from down south and everything. And it doesn't help a steel worker who's now facing 25% tariffs. These are all the realities that you have to deal with the budget.
Did the government do enough as far as making things affordable for people? They point to some of the income tax changes, things like that from the election campaign, but a lot of times people are wanting, PST cut or the PST taken off things.
Oh, well, I beat the drum on the PST cuts in better times. This was not the time for it. I actually have very little problem with what they did do, simply because I thought their election platform, the Saskatchewan election platform, hit right notes in terms of key areas where they could focus money and do the right things, whether it was housing programs, whether it be education assistance programs, certainly the mammogram program. All these things are coming through in the budget, and you can't basically criticize the government for not balancing and say, well, spend more. And if anything, I think they probably needed to spend less. I'm a little surprised there aren't any taxes to balance things off, particularly now because this is the first budget after that election, and you might be able to get away with it. But that wasn't the strategy, which gets back to the question you asked earlier. Kind of a budget that didn't have a great strategy, so it comes across as being rather fictitious, which is what I just wrote. It's, and I don't know why that you want to do that, particularly after a 17-year-old government where people are going to be complaining about that very thing.
That's a subtle plug for your column, Murray. Well done. You're a vet. Murray Mandrick,
Thank you.
the columnist for Post Media. Thanks to Murray, and we'll send it over to Alex now.
Thanks, Adam. I'm here with Peter Gilmer with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. Now, Peter, tell us your thoughts on this budget. I want to get your thoughts on SED and CIS. There is a kind of small increase, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the 2% increase for SED and CIS, certainly we don't believe that delivers enough. It works out to roughly $20 per SED or CIS beneficiary and about $24 a month for folks on SED. So given the kind of cost of living crisis that we've been dealing with and the fact that these rates have been far too low for far too long, that's nowhere near enough, and we would certainly hope that we would be seeing more. We're also concerned about how that relates to the housing crisis presently, because there's really three ways that you can deal with a crisis of affordable housing. One is to look at capping rents in the private market. One is expansion of social housing where rent is geared to income. And the third is making sure that people have the incomes necessary to meet their most basic needs, including their costs of rent. But really in this budget, we're continuing to bet 0 for 3. So ideally we would have all three, but we're not really anywhere close to where we need to be on any of those factors. We're also concerned that this doesn't deliver the $10 a day agreement on childcare. We're certainly wondering why that still hasn't been signed off on. There's a lot of money being left on the table, and certainly that's an absolutely essential factor when we're looking at affordability for families. Saskatchewan is already a childcare desert with not nearly enough spaces, with properly trained staff and justly paid staff. So certainly a combination of the $10 a day with an expansion of spaces is really where we need to be. One final point I would make, and this connects to the housing front again, is that when the rental supplement in Saskatchewan was eliminated back in 2018, the promise at that time, or the words of comfort that we were given, was that within a few years there would be a Saskatchewan housing benefit that would be in effect, and that would meet the needs. We do now have we've had a Saskatchewan housing benefit for a few years, but it doesn't help those people who are on the CIS and SED programs. You're declared ineligible if you're on one of those programs. So the prime beneficiaries of the old rental supplement have never been able to access that additional support. And of course, what this is meaning is that so many of our clients are spending to 80 to 100% of their total incomes on rent. And obviously, we think that no household should be paying more than 30%.
CIS and SED up by 2%. What are your thoughts on that? Like you mentioned that it's a limited increase. So does that even keep up with inflation or challenges that people might have around the cost of living?
No, it doesn't even keep up with the most recent cost of living increases. But once again, to look at this in a historical perspective, with SAID, we had gone from 2015 to 2023 without any increase whatsoever. There wasn't 1 cent increase on the SAID side, even longer on the income support Saskatchewan Assistance Plan side, where we were going back to 2007 before there'd been an increase. So, we had fallen so far behind by 2023. Now we've had small increases in the last 3 budgets, but they're nowhere close to even meeting the present cost of living increases, let alone all that was lost during that 8-year period or longer.
There was also a small increase around getting some repairs done to Saskatchewan Housing Corporation units in Regina, throughout the province, Regina, Saskatoon. Can I get your thoughts on that? Obviously, there is, as you mentioned, a housing shortage.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on getting some of those units back up and running, repaired?
Well, certainly having all these vacant social housing units has been a top concern for us over the last few years. And as I understand it, the commitment was for getting 285 units back into usage in the course of the year. I guess I would just suggest that, in Regina alone, we're looking at 534 vacant units that need to be brought up to speed. And, if we look at the actual cost of all the vacant units across the province that are on the market, it's really disturbing that we haven't made best use of those. Because really, in the big picture, the percentage of folks in the province that are receiving non-market housing or subsidized housing is extremely low. And so ultimately, we not only need to get these units back up and running and people making use of them, but we also need to be expanding the social housing stock, period, because we are dealing with the highest increase in market rents across the country, and we need to have that balanced out by more non-market housing, where basically your rent is based on what your income is, or geared to your income.
Tariffs, obviously a big topic of this budget, or more specifically, a lack of kind of contingency planning around tariffs. For those who are on income assistance, who are in need of more help, what do you make of that decision to not kind of build up a plan to have a provincial government address the effects of tariffs?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously this is going to have an impact on everybody, but our experience working in the low-income sector is that the people that are always hurt the most by these types of changes are the people who have the least. And so when we're going into a budget where folks are only getting an additional 2% at the lowest end of the spectrum, knowing that the impacts on the economy across the board, that's disturbing for us.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
All right, Adam, I'm going to throw it back to you. That was Peter Gilmer with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry. Adam?
Thanks so much, Alex. We're going to talk some healthcare now with Linda Rankus, the Vice President of QP Local 5430, representing healthcare workers. And Linda, what's your reaction to today's budget?
Very disappointing. For healthcare workers who have been named as healthcare heroes after pandemic, but yet we haven't seen a wage increase. We're currently in negotiations with a 2-year expired collective agreement and seen no movement at the table. They tell us in today's budget there's a lot of spending going to be happening, but it appears that they're on track to actually spend more than what was in the budget, or less than what was in the budget last year. Their focus is on infrastructure, recruiting. That's great. We welcome that, but we need some focus on retention. That's our biggest disappointment. Our healthcare workers haven't received a meaningful wage increase for probably 8 years. We took a number of years where we took zeros because we were in those economic times, and now we're so far behind. The CPI has increased by approximately 30% in the last decade. And yet our healthcare workers have only seen approximately 14% in that time period. Our purchasing power has gone down such that healthcare workers are leaving. They can't keep up.
Specifically, where are we seeing the biggest gaps when it comes to the workers that you represent? I know there's, in different areas, some are worse than others.
I think we're seeing it in all of our classifications. I mean, we represent approximately 250 classifications under CUPE, and they're all working short. But I can, specifically see in the nursing departments working short all the time. In the dietary departments, they can't seem to recruit people because of the low wages and the working conditions. People are always being asked to work short. You can't continually do the work of 2 and 3 people by yourself. So, this is our biggest frustration.
When it comes to some of the things that have made headlines over the last several months, like sending women to Calgary for breast cancer care, or ERs being full, urgent care centers not being staffed. In Saskatoon, we know City Hospital on reduced hours in the ER. Those are the effects, as we hear from CUPE and the other unions, and also SUN, about a lack of staffing and people burning out and leaving to other provinces. Is that the result of what you're saying?
I think, yes, it is the result of that, and I think it's a result of very poor planning on the part of the Sask Health Authority. You need to continue to retain your workers. You need to continue to involve them as part of the process on how to improve patient care. And they haven't done that. They simply contract the work out. So we'll send you to Calgary. We'll pay an exorbitant amount for the cost of the test, rather than ensuring that service could be provided here, ensuring that there's enough seats at Sask Polytech to get that education, and then ensure that those graduates stay in Saskatchewan and work for you.
What would you have liked to see in the budget that wasn't in there? Were there 2 or 3 things, or is it? I know the ministers today spoke about his health and human resources plan, which we've talked a lot about. Was there something in the budget that wasn't in there that you were expecting or hoping to see?
I was really hoping to see more on the retention piece. Okay, we're welcome and happy to see. We're infrastructure. We're opening up more education seats. But we still have to fill those with workers, okay? The urgent care center was opened here in Regina last year. We're still not fully operational, and we're going to build more. We've got to make sure we have workers first.
Linda, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That's Linda Rankus, the Vice President of CUPE, Local 5430, representing healthcare workers. Alex, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. I'm here with Samantha Beacott, President of the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. Samantha, what are your thoughts on this budget?
Well, it appears to be promising, $186 million additional into education, although at the same time we heard comments from Trent Witherspoon talking about that it's an actual cut. So we do have some questions about whether the government will be able to fulfill their commitment to fully funding our provincial collective agreement, whether the additional funds are going to be able to account for inflation and enrollment. We're going to continue to do some analysis. As always, the budget is a bit of a mystery, and being able to kind of interpret all of those lines and make sure we're fully understanding what's there. It takes some time to do that, but we're going to continue to work through that and make sure that students are getting what they need to be successful in their classrooms.
What do you think about the approach to education in general? Obviously, you mentioned the $186 million meant to address education. 130 of that was for the collective agreement. What does that leave, I guess, in terms of what else would you have liked to see in this budget?
Well, again, we have some questions of whether $130 million is even enough to fulfill the commitments within the collective agreement, especially around classroom complexity. We did see further commitment, or upholding their commitments, I should say, of expanding those specialized support classrooms, and there's some funds dedicated to that, some funds dedicated to K-3 literacy. Although it's only $2 million, we would like to see an expansion of that. Again, we just want to make sure that students are getting what they need, that the budget accounts for enrollment growth and inflationary pressures, and we would like to see this province get back to when we were first in the country for per student funding. Over the last 2 years, we have started to see a bit of a repair, which does show some promise. We need to make sure we're continuing on that path and we continue to invest in our students.
You mentioned the $2 million for K-3 literacy. Premier Scott Moe in his press conference really stressed that was a goal for the province. What do you make of it only being $2 million?
Well, K-3 is critical. We want to make sure that students know how to read when they reach grade 3 so that they can start reading to learn beyond those grades. So looking at that $2 million, I question how far that's going to go across 27 school divisions. And again, we want to make sure our kids are set up with success, and knowing to read at K-3 is a strong indicator of whether they'll be successful through the rest of their K-12 education. So there's a close tie between graduation rates and that K-3 level. So we'd like to see a stronger investment there, but again, making sure kids are set up for success is key here.
And maybe for those who haven't been paying attention, obviously the kind of contract dispute went through arbitration. Can you kind of walk us through what is happening now?
Yeah, it went to arbitration. We expected it to be done at the end of arbitration, but there's still some work in terms of finalizing the language around our class complexity provisions. We are incredibly thrilled to see that historic decision by the arbitrator that we will have provisions within our collective agreement to address classroom complexity. Now some additional work going back to meet with the GTBC to try and finalize that language. We're hopeful it can be done quickly so that we can start getting those supports in classrooms as soon as possible.
There was also some money for some new schools. Obviously, those are still years away. What's the situation right now around classroom space-wise and the number of students in classrooms?
It definitely varies across the province, not only looking at packed classrooms. I know I've heard of libraries being used to combine 2 classrooms at the same time with upwards of 60 children, 2 different lessons happening. Which is a challenging situation on its own. At the same time, we also have aging buildings that need to see repair and need to see maintenance. So it's good to see some investment within the provincial budget based on that, but we'll see if it's enough. And again, those projects are a long ways out. So as we're planning for growth and we hear this government talk about growth in Saskatchewan and the growing province, those people are bringing children with them. We want to make sure that they have a space to learn, and we want to make sure that they have the professional supports available in schools and classrooms to ensure that they can learn in our schools.
Last question from me. Your members are this school year is kind of set to wind down. This has been a long year for your members. What have you heard from them? What have they brought to you as concerns?
Similar concerns as what I've shared today, just some excitement around that historic decision by the arbitrator, definitely some relief after a 2-year process really through bargaining that we finally have a bit of a conclusion to that round, and then also looking forward to our next round. There's some concerns again about that transparency within the budget, whether our contract would be fully funded or not. It was great to hear the commitment today. Again, actions will speak louder than words, and we'll see if that comes to fruition as we work through the implementation.
Thank you very much, Samantha.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was Samantha Beacott, president with the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation. Adam, I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks so much, Alex. We're getting reaction fast and furious here, and if you've heard the volume go up, it's because all the rooms that were filled with budget day guests and staffers and MLAs, cabinet ministers, it's now let out, and that's where you see this shot of the rotunda, great shot by our crew. Here down at the Saskatchewan Legislature, you're watching CBC Saskatchewan's coverage of the 2025-26 budget. And the story of the budget, as you've heard from a lot of the stakeholders today, is that thin surplus that the government's projecting for next year, $12 million, but no specific contingency built into the budget for tariffs from the US or China. We've heard from some different people, including Leader Post Marie Mandrick, Jim Farney from the Johnson Soyama School, talking about how canola, the tariffs from China, are really going to impact the Saskatchewan budget. We heard today from Minister Ryder and Premier Moe, who both said that to them, it didn't make a lot of sense to build this into the budget because they did not know what those could be based on the day, the year, the month, the week. These tariffs could change fast and furious, and they have been. Right now we look at the overall numbers, $21.1 billion in revenue. That's up from last year. Expenses up just under $1 billion to $21 billion. That gives you that $12 million surplus, as you see on the board here, projected for 25-26. Government looking at $74.8 million in 26-27, and then $143.9 million in 27-28. And I'm now joined by the Minister of Social Services for the Saskatchewan government, Terry Jensen. Welcome to our live budget show.
Hey, great to be here. It's a wonderful afternoon.
So, Minister, when it comes to your file, your ministry, what are the things that you want to highlight to folks?
Well, there's a number of things in this budget that are very, very good news. We have additional funding for housing for Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. We're funding the second year of the provincial approach to homelessness. We also we actually have some stakeholders here that are very excited to be here. One of them is a group called Push, and they've been advocating for a while now to have a group home built for high medical need children and young adults. And so we have committed in this year's budget to begin the planning process for an 8-bed home in Saskatoon. It'll be kind of the first of its kind in the province, and it's very exciting. They're here, and they would love to talk to you, I'm sure. The other one that really, it may not sound like much, but it's pretty important, is we're providing funding for 2 additional deaf and blind interpreters. So American Sign Language interpreters. We know that there's a need for that in the province, and that need has been identified, and so we're going to be providing $140,000 in this budget so that they can add two more American Sign Language interpreters. So those are kind of the 2 or 3 things. There's a number of other things in the budget too, but I know you're a busy guy, you've probably got lots of people to talk to, but we're very excited as a ministry to have a 4.5% overall increase in our budget. Yeah.
When it comes to the SIS and SED program, those both increased by about $11 million. We've heard that's still not going to keep up with cost of living inflation. What can you say to advocates for people that are on income assistance that want to see that increase by even more?
Sure. So the 2% is on the base benefit. Okay, what everybody starts with in either SIS or SED. That 2% is also there's also within SIS and SED. We're also increasing travel and meal per diems. Okay, so that is going to ease the cost of going to appointments and being able to travel where those clients need to travel. In addition, on the SED side, the Canada Disability Benefit federal program is going to be rolling out, and that is going to provide eligible recipients in our SED program with an additional $2,400 per year. So that's an additional $200 per month that we are not going to touch those benefits. Those will be benefits that will go to those qualified recipients. In addition to that, in SED, we also have the income exemption increase of $1,000 per year. So the base amount may only be 2%, but when you start layering some of the other things on top, it's a pretty substantial increase.
I know last week at SARM there were a lot of questions about mental health and addictions and issues affecting not only the big cities but smaller centers. In Saskatoon we have a bit of an overdose crisis. Needless to say, their government has acted and put the emergency response center in operation there. What can you say to people about what the ministry is doing to deal with that issue?
So that would really belong to Minister Carr, Mental Health and Addictions Minister. I know it is tied to a homelessness issue that we have, because we do know that we have some people that are homeless that do have barriers, and those barriers could be addictions, unfortunately, or they could be mental health barriers. So when we're talking about working within that homelessness space to improve conditions for each individual, it's a multi-ministry approach. So my ministry within social services we're always talking with Minister Carr's office and her officials within the mental health and addiction space, because we know they, in a lot of cases, they intersect. And for us to be able to help individuals, we have to be working together as ministries to do that.
Last one for me about the housing, and there's been a lot of questions about Saskatchewan housing units, repairing them, whether they're even able to be retrofitted or fixed or renovated. What can you tell us about what the government's doing there?
So we've actually increased the amount of funding for the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation in this budget year over year. So that will enable us to begin the repair and renovation of 285 additional units, specifically in Saskatoon, Regina, and Prince Albert. We know that the need is the greatest right now in Saskatoon and Regina. Prince Albert is not far behind, so we're being proactive in really pooling our resources where they're needed. In addition to that, the ministry and myself as minister, we're really focused on making sure that we have the resources where those resources are needed. So we're taking a look at what we have for inventory around the province and really trying to consolidate as much of that inventory into the places that we find the greatest need. And it's not a process that happens overnight, but it's something that we're continually working on, and we're starting to see some results in that. Which is
Minister, thanks for your time.
Terrific, thank you.
That's Minister Terry Jensen, the Minister of Social Services for the government of Saskatchewan, talking about Saskatchewan Housing Corporation units, what the government's doing with SIS and SED, and he talked about different ways in which that's been increased, $11 million overall, 2%, but he talked about different ways in which that's affecting that program. I'm going to throw it over now to Alex Quon. Alex.
Thanks, Adam. I am here with Elena Young and Sally Hauser. Let's talk about tariffs. What are your thoughts on the province's planning around tariffs? I'll go with you first.
Well, you know, it's like the Premier and the Finance Minister woke up in the twilight zone or something in the past 3 months didn't happen. This would have been a bad budget if it was delivered last year without the past few months and the threat to the South. We see a budget here that gives no level of comfort to people who are so anxious about their jobs and their future, about the very sovereignty of our country. It does nothing about the Canada-wide infrastructure we need, building pipeline to the East Coast, rail transmission lines, but it doesn't even talk about what we can do within our own borders about building that energy infrastructure we need. I'm frankly flabbergasted at how backward looking this is. We need it. We need leadership that's looking to the future. This ain't it.
Elena, what about your thoughts?
Yeah, frankly, it's staggering, right? And the Premier might be living in denial. I'm not sure what news he's been watching for the past 3 months, but we are in a trade war. There are tariffs on steel, there are tariffs on canola. We're in a trade war not just with the United States, but with China. And for the government of Saskatchewan to basically close their eyes, plug their ears, and pretend that this doesn't happen is it's baffling. We need our economy to pay for strong social services, healthcare, education, the things that people voted for in this last election, the things that this part-time premier said he heard from the people of Saskatchewan. But all we've seen is a lack of planning for the future, no plan for tariffs, the economy, and cuts to healthcare and education. It's remarkable.
This is a kind of a departure from what other provinces have done who have recently released budgets. You know, Alberta, BC, New Brunswick, they've all released deficit budgets specifically with planning around contingencies for tariffs. What do you make of the decision to go in a different path for this provincial government?
You know, this is a government that seems to be offside from most of the rest of the country in all the worst possible ways on this planning for the future, on planning for the impact of tariffs, also on being one of the only ones to not sign on to the federal government's childcare plan. You know, sometimes fortune favors the bold. Most of the time, it certainly doesn't favor the weak and the meek, and that's what we see with this budget.
Elena, they also, the province went to the trouble of having an analysis of what the potential effects of these tariffs would look like on Saskatchewan. It's the first time we've heard these and seen these numbers. What do you make of that, of having that analysis and then deciding not to use it?
It's kind of wild. I mean, a half-page analysis in a budget when this is the single biggest issue facing Canadians, facing this country, is again just staggering. We know these guys think they're fiscal mavericks based on their long and storied history of being unable to balance a budget at the best of times. But again, we saw Alberta, $4 billion contingency. BC, $4 billion contingency. Even New Brunswick, $112 million contingency, recognizing that we are in a trade war. And so for this government to roll out this budget with not even a concept of a plan in regards to tariffs, and then claim a $12 million surplus, I don't know, I think the standing ovation the finance minister got is going to be longer than this government's surplus.
I guess that answers the question that I was going to ask. What do you make of the government, touting a surplus when you mentioned all of these kind of major concerns for people in this province?
Yeah, I think to believe that, you'd also have to believe that there's a second bridge coming in PA. So we'll wait and see. This is government that's missed the mark at the best of times. A government that missed the mark in the last budget by, I think, about $400 million. So to roll into a situation where their own budget documents contemplate billions of dollars in tariff impacts, and again, claim a $12 million surplus while cutting healthcare, while cutting education, while not signing on to childcare, and having nothing by way of economic diversification or development is, again, just frankly staggering how out of touch this government still is.
Sally, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on what an NDP government would have liked to see in terms of addressing this tariff and this trade war? What would the official opposition have done?
Well, the first thing an NDP government would have done with this budget is acknowledge reality, acknowledge the world that we're currently in. It's like they started planning for the budget back in the fall, and at no point did they adapt or correct course. I think that's the first thing. The other thing is with projections and the little fiscal history, NDP governments have a very strong track record of balancing budgets and lowering debt as opposed to increasing it by $30 billion in a period of 17 years. Now the people of Saskatchewan are going to be on the hook for $1 billion a year to big Bay Street bankers just to service that debt. That $1 billion, that's more than our corrections and policing budget combined. There's so many more things we could and should be spending that on as a province. They increased the debt by $100 billion last year, $100 million last year, $100 million this year. We can't keep going this way. It's not sustainable.
All right, Sally, Elena, thank you very much for speaking with me. Thank you. Adam, I'll go back to you. That was Elena Young and Sally Hauser with the NDP talking about, of course, the big topic of the day, tariffs. Adam, back.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with the Minister of Health, Jeremy Cockrell. And Minister, what are some of the things in this budget you want to highlight to folks?
Well, I think really two priorities of our government as it stands right now. Number one, making sure that we're making the right investments into primary care to make sure that everyone in this province, whether they live in Regina or whether they live in a small rural community, have access to the right primary care practitioners. And you're seeing us make investments in that in terms of adding residency seats for doctors all over the province in different specialties, but most importantly, family medicine. You're seeing us add more funding for more nurse practitioner positions, because again, primary care doesn't necessarily mean just a doctor or just a nurse practitioner. We really think there's a whole spectrum of options in terms of how people can connect to a primary care practitioner. That's one. The additional investment that we're making into our surgical performance, really, around the province. We have a very ambitious goal of achieving 450,000 surgeries over the next 4 years. That's going to mean we have to do more surgeries in Regina. We have to do more surgeries in our regional centers, more surgeries in Saskatoon. And, we actually have our provincial head of surgery here today. And, I've been working closely with Dr. Kelly to make sure that we can find opportunities to get the most out of our regional sites, but then where we have opportunities to recruit the right people to our province and then add different initiatives like the robotic surgeries that we have at RUH and St. Paul's and pretty soon here at Pasqua. That's how we're going to reach that ambitious goal and make sure that Saskatchewan people at the end of the day have a reasonable wait time for surgeries.
When it comes to concerns we've heard so far today, just one of the big ones was retention, that there's recruitment efforts, there's more seats added, but that current healthcare workers, they're wanting to leave the profession or they're maybe being burnt out, they're having to work too much. What's your message to the healthcare workers who are concerned about the government's retention strategy?
Yeah, I would say we hear you. We hear that it's a challenging work environment. I've been able myself to tour almost all the hospitals in Saskatoon, Regina, and our healthcare workers in all those hospitals are working extremely hard, again, really in the name of providing your family, my family, all the families in Saskatchewan the best possible care. So we hear those concerns. That's why we're making these investments that we are into City Hospital, for example, in Saskatoon, to ensure that we can have better patient flow in that hospital. It's, I said to somebody earlier today, adding 109 acute beds at City Hospital, that's like adding another hospital in Saskatoon. That's a major investment. I think about the other investments we're making into Prince Albert Victoria Hospital. This is all about expanding capacity so that we can ease patient flow. And, again, it comes back to, I also think about the urgent care center in Regina, making sure that patients are accessing the right level of care at the right time. We've seen nearly 30,000 patients since the urgent care center opened here in Regina. It's that kind of example that ensures that our healthcare workers are seeing the right patients at the right time, and that patients at the end of the day have an appropriate wait time for the care that they need.
When it comes to surgeries, we're also there's been a lot of talk about having to send women out of province, concerns about costs over that. Is the budget address that at all?
Oh, absolutely. There's new funding in the budget this year as we open up and staff up our breast health center right here in Regina at Regina Crossing. I had an opportunity to tour the center just earlier this week. Actually, we're getting very close to opening it. We have folks that are setting up the equipment right now. Really excited how that breast health center is going to really create a better pathway for women on their breast cancer journey in the southern half of this province. In terms of the comments, in terms of the contract that we have with Beam Radiology in Calgary, I don't think we should be ideological about this. If there are options that get women a quicker diagnosis so that we can get them into surgery quicker, that's a good thing for that woman. That's a good thing for her family. That's a good thing for their community. At the end of the day, I actually just spoke to a woman here a couple minutes ago who had actually gone to Calgary for her diagnostics. She said it was an easy process, and she came back here, had her surgery within 2 weeks. That's the kind of flow that we're looking to get. And again, as we staff up the breast health center up here in Regina, as we look at other initiatives in the province, we also want to keep those options available. Again, it's all about getting women diagnosis as quickly as possible and then into surgery if needed. And I should also say too, it's not just in Regina, because we're also adding a second mobile mammography bus. And again, if you live in Kenora or Priestville or Maple Creek, that's where your diagnostics are often done, and so, or your initial screening, is often done. And so, again, having that additional capacity is going to be really important for women around the province.
And finally, when it comes to concerns over tariffs and whether the overall budget or the government spending will be affected by that, I know there's uncertainty there, but are you concerned at all, and should people be concerned that their healthcare could be affected if the government's finances are hampered by these tariffs?
It is a clear priority of this government to provide better access to healthcare around the province. And, let's zoom out here a little bit. When we talk about how we're engaging with our largest trading partner in the world, the United States of America, there's nobody who's doing that better, in my mind, across the country than our Premier Scott Moe. We've got 9 trade offices around the world, so we're working on diversifying our trade markets, as we have been for several years. But I can tell you our Premier, our other ministers, our MLAs are engaging directly with elected U.S. representatives at the state level, at the federal level, again, to ensure that we are communicating the importance of Saskatchewan to the United States. We don't know what the president's going to do tomorrow. We don't know what the president's going to do next week. Our focus is on communicating our story, communicating our importance, protecting Saskatchewan jobs, and then when you talk about the public services, whether that be healthcare, education, ensuring that we're being responsible with the investments that we've made so they're fiscally sustainable, but also that patients kind of know that they have access to that care when and where they need it.
Minister, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
That's the Minister of Health, Jeremy Cockrell, speaking about today's budget and some of the priorities in that for the government when it comes to healthcare. We'll send it over to Alex Quon, who has a guest. Alex.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, I'm here with Everett Hindley, Minister of Education. Minister, talk to us about this budget. What do you think this delivers for people in Saskatchewan?
Well, thanks. Most importantly, we're really trying to make sure that we're focusing on the kids, students across Saskatchewan, and the education sector that supports them, teachers, educational assistants, the school boards and trustees, and the school divisions right across this province. It's a $3.5 billion education budget this year, building upon last year's record education budget, with a number of key areas: investments into K-3 literacy, investments into the expansion of the specialized support classroom classrooms, more PMR, preventive maintenance and repair funding for schools, for capital, some new school projects announced, particularly in the city of Saskatoon. So again, are really doing everything we can to support students and their academic success in Saskatchewan.
I wanted to ask you about the Premier kind of stressed the importance of getting K-3 literacy up in Saskatchewan. Talk to me about that goal and what the province is doing.
For sure. It really is a renewed focus on that. So in this budget, you'll see some additional dollars put towards that. What we want to do is be able to help support teachers with the expertise they have in K-3 literacy and really providing them with any additional resources, tools, perhaps it's screening for kids at that age. But again, working and collaborating with teachers, with those in our classroom to say, what can we do to make sure that we're giving our kids in that K-3 level every opportunity to succeed? Because all of the data, everything points towards if a child is reading at grade level by the time they're exiting grade 3, they really are set up for success for the rest of their academic years, whether it's junior high, post-secondary education, you name it. So that is going to be a very strong and significant focus for us to make sure we're supporting literacy in our schools.
You mentioned obviously some focus on new schools in Saskatoon. Yeah. There's a large chunk of the capital budget is dedicated to getting some repairs through schools and getting new schools off the ground. Talk to us a little about the schedule forward for getting more schools built in this province.
Sure, and it is quite a schedule because, as you know, there's probably 20, 21 projects that are already underway, whether they're replacements or significant repairs that have been announced in previous budgets. So it's a matter of trying to balance the projects that are already underway, yet continuing to make sure that we are addressing the other challenges, and they are twofold. One, it's enrollment challenges, particularly in Regina and Saskatoon, and you've seen some previous announcements of new capital projects in Regina. In this particular budget, some of that focus is now on Saskatoon. The South Corman Park project, which was initially a renovation, is now a replacement. New schools in the Aspen Ridge and Kensington areas of Saskatoon. So recognizing that capital is needed to help address some of those enrollment pressures in our major centers, but in addition to that, recognizing there's other communities across this province, smaller cities in other parts of Saskatchewan, plus some rural communities that need some funding as well. And we're doing some of that through the PMR funding and other major and minor renovation projects. We're proud to be able to continue to do that and balance out the projects and get as many done as quickly as we can with the funds we have available.
Now we've talked to a few people already today. They've mentioned wanting to hear more about the $10 daycare expansion. Yeah. Can you give us an update on what the status is right now? Sure.
So we continue to be in contact with the federal government. You know, I had a conversation with the former federal minister, a couple of weeks ago, and at the officials level, chatting with the federal government to see what we can do to address some of the concerns that are out there, because we do have a year to go in this agreement. It expires March of 26, not March of 25, and I think it would be prudent for us to make sure that some of the concerns that we are hearing, whether it's from families, from parents, and from childcare operators. I've had the opportunity to meet with SECA, the Saskatchewan Early Childhood Association. They've been advocating on behalf of their members as well to see what we can do to make this program better, to address some of the concerns that are being raised, to make sure that it's sustainable, that it is affordable, and that we're able to expand this program across this province. So we continue to negotiate with our federal government, and we are open to signing a deal.
You mentioned some concerns. What are those concerns that you've heard?
Well, I think some of the concerns are around just the sustainability of the program. There are concerns around, for example, kids that age out kind of midway through, things like of that nature. Other concerns I think that have been identified with us that we, as we're consulting and talking to perhaps other provinces and territories, seeing what we can do. But again, every province is a little bit different. We were one of the first provinces to sign on to this agreement, to move quickly to expand the number of childcare spaces across Saskatchewan, but we know we need to do so in a sustainable fashion. So those are the things I think it would be it's incumbent upon us as government to make sure that we are hearing the concerns that we are hearing from those that are in the sector, but then trying to act upon them to see if there's a way that perhaps we can work with the federal government to make it better for everyone.
The arbitration board recently delivered their decision around teacher's contract. Yeah. I guess there is still more to go on that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, grateful for the arbitrators' report, as I've said previously, and that is included in the budget. It's fully funded in this budget. We have, as the arbitrator had indicated, about 60 days here just to hammer out the language, to negotiate the language around the agreement. As I've said previously, and I've had these conversations with President Bekoff boycott from the SDF, that we're anxious to try and get this done as quickly as possible. So to be able to collaborate with teachers across this province to get that part dealt with and to move forward.
I spoke with President Beacott just a short while ago. She had mentioned there may be some concerns around it, the new contract not being fully funded at $130 million. Can you offer some clarity to that? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I would just say again that it is fully funded. Again, there's some finer details, I guess, that need to be again hammered out in terms of the language itself and what that looks like. It is a collective agreement, so the Government Trustee Bargaining Committee and the SDF would be having those conversations, I think, and trying to arrive at where it needs to be at here to finalize that in the coming days and weeks. So again, we're grateful for the arbitrators' work and looking forward to continuing to collaborate with teachers across this province to make for a better education system for everyone.
Final question from me. There was also some money in this budget for the portable classrooms.
Yeah.
How is it going addressing classroom sizes? What does the work look like?
For sure. So yeah, a couple of things as we've talked about previously. There's the investment into new capital projects, brand new schools in parts of communities where they really need them. Secondly, that takes some time. So wherever we can, and we've done that, on a few occasions, put some additional dollars towards relocatable classrooms because it's easier and quicker to be able to get those operational sooner for school divisions. So that is an important component of what we need to try to do in the education system and through the entire sector to make sure that we are providing some relief when it comes to some of these classroom pressures. So that's a significant component of this budget as well.
Awesome. Minister, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Everett Hindley, Minister of Education with the province of Saskatchewan. Adam, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with Michael Kelly, the head of surgery for the Saskatchewan Health Authority.
And University of Saskatchewan.
University of Saskatchewan, thank you. When it comes to what's in the budget and what the government's aiming to do with surgical wait times, what can you tell folks about what the specifics are?
Yeah, so I've been in this job for 2 years, and I think over the last 2 years, especially out of the pandemic and the backlog from the pandemic, we've made pretty good headway. Approximately 92% of patients are now getting a date of offer surgery within 8 months. 8 months is, of course, still too long, but that's come down a lot, right? And I think there's been some really good initiatives that have been around, say, the breast health work, things that are moving the standard forward a lot. There's a lot of good work around the joint replacement program in the province, and I think it's the kind of work that is never completed, will never be perfect, but I'm really proud of all of the providers, the teams, the surgeons, and anesthetists, everybody in the province who's been contributing to this work. And I think over the next couple of years we'll continue to see more and more progress.
When it comes to where we're seeing some of the longest delays, what are people waiting the longest for right now?
Yeah, so long wait surgery is actually majority of times not there. I told you 92% of people within 8 months. There are some surgeons that still have long waits. The ministry launched a website where the patient can go on and look and see how long their surgeon's wait list is compared to other surgeons. So around joint replacement, there are some surgeons with long wait lists. Some of the ear, nose, and throat surgeries, there's longer wait lists. We've made a lot of good work and good progress around cancer access and access to cancer care. Of course, that has to be prioritized sometimes over elective surgery. All in all, it's coming down, it's improving, but more work to do.
When it comes to coming out of the pandemic, and you said you've been in this for 2 years, what sort of progress have you seen from the province and from the SHA and the surgeons to really bite into that surgical wait?
Yeah, so I think when I took this job, I knew there would be that momentum. I found that actually exciting that this was a priority area of the government and the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I think one thing that I've really noticed a lot of is our ability now to staff operating rooms and inpatient units and that the staffing and nursing, all the allied professionals is coming. It's not perfect yet either, but that's been something that's been very positive. We've had good luck recruiting surgeons across the province. There's a few places where we still have some issues or some recruitment problems, but we have recruited many surgeons over the last couple of years as well, and then work around anesthesia, improving a number of anesthesia anesthesia access is there. And I think the focus on all of the work is really good, and actually the pressure of performing, because these things are critical for patients. When you think of, nearing 100,000 surgeries for the year, that's 1 in 12 people in this province are having surgery each year. And so that kind of service is so important for the people of this province. And it's great to be a part of that.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. That's Michael Kelly, the head of surgery for the SHA in the University of Saskatchewan. Alex Quon standing by with a guest. Alex?
Thank you, Adam. Yep, I am here with Mayor of Saskatoon, Cynthia Block. Mayor, what did you take away from this budget for the mayor of the largest city in the province?
Well, I think first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you that the municipal revenue sharing is going up and that there aren't any changes to that. As you know, we live in some trying times and with a lot of uncertainty, so to have that certainty for a municipality at this time is just extremely relieving.
In terms of the kind of overall budget, a lot of things in there. One of the things I think that will be the focus of what was missing was dealing with tariffs. What are your thoughts on not having a contingency plan in place for the province?
I think I'll let the province speak to that one. I know that municipalities are working closely with the province to try to make sure that we are planning our contingencies as we need to. As you know, the Premier has asked municipalities to be cautious about our procurement, to try to buy local, buy Canadian, and that is definitely what the City of Saskatoon is doing.
Also in this budget was expansion to City Hospital in Saskatoon. Welcoming news for you to hear that there will be more beds going in there?
I think that anything that we can do to support healthcare right now is going to be important to the residents of our city, and not just the residents of our city. Saskatoon is really like the gateway to the north, and so we service areas that go well beyond our city. So it's really crucial that we have that type of investment.
Mayor, this is kind of your first time as mayor at one of these budgets. How has that experience been for you going through this, getting to sit in the chamber?
I mean, it was very interesting. I've always found it interesting to watch the behavior of elected officials, and they're a little more spicy than we are at our city council meetings. But I think that homelessness and housing will continue to be the urgent matter of our time. And I've said this repeatedly, and will continue to say it. And I will, continue to work urgently with this province and the government and the folks on all sides, because unless or until people are safely housed, I don't think we get to the other side of this crisis. Saskatoon is in the middle of an overdose crisis, a homelessness crisis, but foundationally, until people are housed, this isn't going to change.
There was also some money put towards, new schools in Saskatoon. Those are obviously a few years away, but Saskatoon's population continues to grow. Excited about those new schools coming in?
Yeah, Saskatoon is the fastest growing city in Canada, both by population and economic growth. And that's encouraging in some ways, but it also puts lots of pressures on cities. And so we need schools, and we need them fast. And I think some of these announcements have been known for a while, but what I'm happy to see is that we are moving in the right direction to get to the point where we are actually creating them in these new neighborhoods. So that's really important to keep making those steps forward.
Mayor, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Adam, that was Cynthia Block, Mayor of Saskatoon. I will go back to you now.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with Matt Love, the NDP's education critic. And Matt, when it comes to the budget, what are your initial takeaways?
Well, initial takeaway, Adam, is that we see in the budget documents the Sask Party government plans to spend less on education universally this year than they spent last year. That's the same in healthcare. So we've got a government that isn't focused on the future. They've got the wrong priorities, and I think it's going to leave our classrooms without the supports that our kids need.
Were there things specifically that you wanted to see in there that aren't in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to see adequate, predictable, sustainable funding for Saskatchewan classrooms. And yet again, we've got a government that over the last 10 years, they've led Saskatchewan to last in the country in education, and they seem content to stay there. So I'm disappointed overall in their vision, but we know that on our side we're focused on the future, and we want to get the supports that our kids need today into Saskatchewan classrooms.
The government hasn't signed on to extend the $10 a day childcare. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been hearing from hundreds of folks My colleague Joan Pratzer has been a fierce advocate for this. We've heard from hundreds of folks, parents, families across this province who rely on that. We know that's important for the economy, for growing Saskatchewan. It's important for young families to maybe they want to get back into or join the workforce. And we've seen the Sask Party government really dragging their feet without any logical explanation as to why they haven't signed on to that yet. We've seen 11 other provinces and territories sign on, and no explanation from this government about why they haven't.
When it comes to supporting the classrooms, you see money for the specialized classrooms. That was something that was in the election platform. There's money in there also to cover the teacher contract. We've seen it, the arbitrator come down with a ruling. What were your thoughts on the arbitrator's ruling, and specifically what needs to be done to help classrooms? Because the talk last year at this time was classroom complexity, class size, not so much what money the teachers were looking for, what the province was willing to pay. It was that other issue. So maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, what we see in this budget is really this government doing the bare minimum of what they are contractually obligated to provide from teachers who've been standing up for our students in our classrooms. You know, this government has been dragged kicking and screaming to bring those supports, and in this budget, they've only done the bare minimum. We think that there's lots more to do. Our province still ranks near the bottom of the pack in per student funding. That's the legacy of the Sask Party government, and there's a lot more work to do. There's more work before today and after today. I'm sorry to say there's still lots of work to do.
Matt, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Adam.
That's Matt Love, the NDP opposition education critic, with his thoughts on today's budget. Alex, I'm going to throw it to you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm with Chris Garrett, CEO of Saskatchewan Realtors Association. Chris, talk to me about your thoughts on this budget.
Yeah, I'm really happy with this budget. We know during some trying times in our economy, the real estate market is actually what provides that resiliency for the everyday Saskatchewan person and family. And so we saw a number of policies supporting housing, such as home ownership, renovation, the secondary suite incentive, and I was just thrilled to hear that the PSD rebate on the construction of new homes, that rebate went permanent. And those are all excellent policies that support housing, real estate, and home ownership.
Home is a big part that I think people might not understand. But for that importance of those tax credits and those incentives, what does that make for people who are looking to get their first home or getting a home, purchasing?
Yeah, absolutely. We are one of the most affordable provinces in this country when we compare to other provinces, and so you would think that home ownership rates would be higher here, but they're not. They're pretty average to other provinces. So this will actually help Saskatchewan people move into home ownership. 50% increase on that first-time home buyer's tax credit, and it's really going to help those individuals who are just kind of on the cusp to make, to many, is the largest investment of their lives, right? So that helps build generational wealth that is really important for Saskatchewan families. And so we're really thrilled to see that particular policy continue.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned uncertain times. Tariffs are the big thing that's kind of on everybody's mind. For the realty market, I guess, what does that look like? Is there going to be a potential effect from tariffs?
Yeah, it's really interesting in Saskatchewan. We have a residential real estate market that doesn't have really peaks and valleys like you would see across the country. And so what we're seeing right now, we're seeing places like Toronto, Vancouver, who have significant dips, 30-40% dips in sales and inventory, and so you feel that impacts of tariffs, right? Individuals, it provides anxiety. In Saskatchewan, we've not felt that yet. So when we take a look at our market stats on a monthly basis, we are still seeing that same story of the progressive increases in the benchmark price for houses. Inventory is still tight. There's still a lot of buyers. As of March, it was 20 consecutive months of above average sales in our province. That means if there was more inventory, there'd be even more sales. So obviously people are coming to Saskatchewan, are wanting to put down roots even more in Saskatchewan, and so there's something there.
In terms of getting people to move to Saskatchewan, do you think that that competitive market, the market that we have in Saskatchewan right now, do you think that it will continue to help people, encourage people to move here?
Absolutely, and I think that is the biggest untapped potential that we have. We're not very dense as a province compared to everybody else. We have vast territory, very small population, and so there's a potential there. We need more people for workers and more for a tax base, and so I do think that's a untapped potential that we have here in Saskatchewan.
Chris, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Adam, that was Chris Garrett with the Saskatchewan Realtors Association. I'll throw it back to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm here with Rhonda Blackmore, the commanding officer of the Saskatchewan RCMP. And what are your thoughts on what you see in today's Saskatchewan budget?
Well, I think from a perspective of policing, it's great to see some of the acknowledgements of some of the assistance that we need in the policing field. I think, it seems to me that the government has recognized that maybe we don't always have to just focus on police funding, that there's some other areas that they can fund to help take some of the burden off police, and allowing police to focus on police duties, where you need a sworn police officer, what the RCMP refers to as a regular member, to do those duties and take some of those other duties and place them to other areas that maybe we can attract a different individual to some of those specific duties.
So when it comes to that, what can you say specifically about what's done there for people that aren't familiar, where the government's directing away from maybe what the RCMP would traditionally do?
Sure thing. For the RCMP, there's money going into prisoner transport, and those positions mean that those individuals, that's their function, is to move prisoners, from our detachments to court or to the remand centers or to provincial and federal correctional centers. So it takes a big burden off of us. We have a huge province, as you know, and to cover that geography takes time and takes resources. So if we don't have to have police officers doing that they're in their home detachments, or we can post them to other detachments, that's a significant benefit for us.
When it comes to the government spending on protection of persons and property, that's the big umbrella that it's under. The RCMP falls under that. What are some things that you picked out of there that's going to help your officers apart from some of the things you talked about?
Yeah, the investment in positions like the SCAN officers, that's the Safer Community and Neighborhoods legislation, which is helpful legislation looking at some of those areas where there's prolific problems, drug dealing, drug trafficking. So that's helpful as well. And as always, we're always interested in to see that continued investment, because I think we can't just sort of invest once and then walk away from it and think this is going to continue. Continuing involvement on technology and different areas that we have to focus on. We did a media release here recently talking about our child exploitation unit. We're seeing highest numbers ever. Our homicide unit investigating last year the highest number of homicides. So crime is continuing to escalate. Crime's continuing to become more violent, and we need to make sure we have the resources, both from a human resource, but also the technology and ability that we can solve those, making sure that we're meeting that very high threshold in criminal court of beyond a reasonable doubt, that not only do we identify the offenders, but that we can successfully put a court package together that prosecutors can successfully prosecute them.
One thing that's in this budget is money for the Marshal Service, which was supposed to start next year. They're going to try and launch it this year. There were some concerns from the RCMP Officers Union in the past that there may be the duplication of services, that maybe we're going to a poaching of that Marshal Service from your officers and our schools from municipal forces. Do you have any concerns about the operation and the start of the Marshal Service? Is the government working with the RCMP to get this launch, as smooth as possible?
Yeah, and the marshals are hiring experienced police officers, so they're coming from a police force. That's what an experienced police officer is. So we're making sure that we're monitoring it to see if there is an impact. At this point, there really hasn't been on the Saskatchewan RCMP, but there's been a good consultation as of late from the government as to how can they best assist policing. What does that look like as far as filling some of those gaps, some of those areas that maybe are a little more challenging for us, and some of those unexpected incidents. We have be it a serious crime or a homicide where we have evidence protection or scene security and those types of things, and we've got commitments from them that absolutely they'd be able to help us out with some of those pieces, which would be beneficial to us, because if it's something unexpected where we need additional resources, instead of working a shift, you may be working a double shift, which isn't always a great way to do things. So certainly we're looking forward to seeing where they can work in with us, and I think I can speak for my municipal counterparts as well, looking at where they can support policing in some of those areas.
Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
That's Rhonda Blackmore, the commanding officer of the Saskatchewan RCMP. Alex, I'm going to send it to you.
Talking here with NDP leader Carla Beck, and we'll listen into some of the questions now.
And on the opportunity that we see right across this province, and that all leaders are going to, as I said, get their elbows up and make sure that we're not caught flat-footed, or our response isn't meek when it comes to the challenges that we're facing. Unfortunately, we didn't see the Premier take me up on that offer today, and I think that's deeply disappointing.
Well, and in his first response, he had mentioned, said, well, we're not going to be the 51st state, but do you feel that wasn't strong enough of a message?
What I asked today was for condemnation of the comments made by not only Donald Trump, repeated comments that we'd be better off as a 51st state. They're going to use economic force to ensure that Canada is the 51st state. These are threats that we heard repeated by Marco Rubio on Canadian soil. I find it deeply offensive.
It is.
It is time to pick a side and condemn these threats, these comments, in the strongest possible terms.
Absolutely.
Can I get your thoughts on this budget as a whole?
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, it's a budget that is not only not focused on the future, it's a budget that isn't based in reality. The realities that we see in this province today, not the least of which the threat of tariffs that are still there, threats to our sovereignty. We're still facing, on April the 2nd, potentially 25% tariffs. The threat of tariffs has already had devastating impact for many in the province. If they come to fruition, that's going to only see more job losses, more financial harm to this province, to our producers. And for this government to really be, again, unfortunately, an outlier in failing to book any contingency, I think is, well, it's simply not a budget that meets the reality of the issues that we're seeing in front of us. And then, to suggest that they're going to have a balanced budget or a $12 million surplus. This is a government that couldn't balance the budget last year, blew their spending by $1 billion, and now with a straight face would have us believe that somehow they're miraculously going to balance this year, I think is, as I've said, an act of pure fiction. In this budget already, we know, despite their claims, this government has booked less in this budget for healthcare and education than they spent last year. Saskatchewan people know inflation hasn't gone down. Cost of living has not gone down. We have a growing population, which is great. But this government continually fails to plan for that growth, fails to plan to deliver the services that we need. Again, it's, I think our finance shadow minister, Trent Witherspoon, said it best. It's not worth the paper that it's written on. Saskatchewan people deserve better than this. It's disappointing, and honestly, I keep thinking, my expectations of this government at this point are pretty low. They keep crawling under those expectations, and I think that's how a lot of Saskatchewan people feel today.
Before the budget we spoke, you mentioned you wanted to see some things addressed, obviously in tariffs, but also some of the problems that were highlighted during the campaign and that have persisted before that. Do you think that the budget addresses those issues that you thought were concerns before even the tariffs?
We see some measures in this budget around affordability, which continues to be top of mind for people right across this province, especially when they're facing job losses. We're facing huge impact to many industries in this province and in an exporting province. We saw many of the measures that were announced today or re-announced today. Saskatchewan people won't see any impact until 2026 on their budgets. When you look at the holding the mill rate in education, that will provide some relief for people. What I wanted to see from this government was that they understood that they needed to continue to invest in education to ensure that our kids are going to get the education that they need and this province needs them to have to focus on that future. We didn't see that today. I know that school boards at some point in the future here will be getting their budgets, but I already know that the result of this budget is going to be more cuts in education. We don't see anything in this budget that is going to fix the urgent problems in our healthcare system. We're flying women out of province. We see hospitals and major centers operating as if they're in a mass casualty event on an ordinary Wednesday. It is, again, I think my expectations of this government are pretty low at this point. I've been here for this, this is my third post-election budget, but they have managed to set the bar even lower. Again, a budget that's not worth the paper that it's written on.
Carla, in terms of dealing with the tariffs, what would you have done if or would have wanted to see the province actually do?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've seen, almost every other province that has come out with their budget so far this year. Remember, these tariffs have been threatened for over 3 months. This shouldn't have been a surprise. We've seen almost every other province come up with some measure of contingency, understanding the impact not only that this might have if tariffs are imposed on April the 2nd, the impact that it's already had when we look at the price of live feeder cattle, for example, the price of canola, and huge impact with not only these threatened tariffs, but also with the Chinese tariffs. There is simply no way that what we've seen already won't have huge financial implications. I hope that we don't see those tariffs on April the 2nd. I hope that the tariffs on canola are taken off immediately or not imposed. But regardless of that, this has already had a slowdown. This has already had an impact on industries here in this province and right across this country. And for this government to suggest that they shouldn't put some form of contingency, let alone protections for those most impacted industries in this budget, is irresponsible.
Carla, thank you very much for speaking with us. Thank you. That was Carla Beck, leader of the official opposition. Adam, I'll throw it back to you.
Alex, thanks so much. In the rotunda here at the Saskatchewan legislature, and we're going to wrap things up here right away, but we're going to go over the numbers one more time for you. These are the provincial budget numbers for 25-26. A slight, razor-thin surplus of $12 million for 25-26 projected. Here's what we're looking at now. That's that $12 million surplus. And then into the future, the projections of an increasing surplus for the province of Saskatchewan. Again, to remind folks that the government hasn't built in contingencies into the budget specifically for the effects of Chinese or U.S. tariffs or counter tariffs. So that's been a talking point for us today and for many of the guests. We'll look at the debt. That's also been discussed as that is increasing, projected to increase by more than $3 billion for 25-26. When we look at the top 5 spending areas, no surprises here. Health, education, social services, agriculture, and as you just heard from the commanding officer of the RCMP, protection of persons and property. And here are the revenue sources. That, of course, is a $21 billion in total revenue. Taxation, $10 billion. Non-renewable resources, $1.6 billion. And transfers to the federal government projected to be $3.9 billion. And finally, commodities. These are the estimates for the Saskatchewan government. Things to watch on there. Oil price expected to rise from what it is today, and the dollar is about a little bit higher than where it's been. Well, those are the numbers. If you want more detail, head over to cbc.ca/sask. We have all of the breakdown for you, including reaction from the Minister of Finance and the Premier, who we didn't hear from here in the Rotunda, but they met with the media earlier today. We have all their reaction on our website. We'll have full coverage. Many of the interviews you heard here today will also be on our website. Of course, if you missed any of this, you can go back on YouTube and check it out. Thanks to our crew. Thanks to my colleague Alex Quon, for Trent, Kirk, Jenna, and Emma. That's the CBC SAS crew. I'm Adam Hunter. This has been our 2025-26 Saskatchewan budget coverage from here at the legislature in Regina. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.